What it do, YouTube? It has been a fat minute to say the least. I did release a promotional video on my social medias saying exactly what I'm doing today, without too much of an intro for my YouTube folks. For my first podcast back in a while, because I slept off on not only podcasts but my book content, I will be doing a live reading of the first three chapters of my book. So if you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to the channel, like the video. It does wonders for me. Takes like 10 seconds for you. Very easy. I'm not one for long intros, so honestly, while my people in live start to come in, I'm gonna just really go ahead and get into reading the book. Let's see. So I am going to read the first three chapters of my book Bloodstone. Um, the just a forewarning, the first chapter is basically a prologue. So the first chapter is a lot of background information, and then the second and third chapter dive into the main characters of my story. Um, so this is really a big introduction to Bloodstone, the story, my world building. It'll give you guys a sense of what exactly kind of the vibe I'm going for. And I don't want to spoil too much personally, but uh, and let's just say that there are a lot of twists and turns when it comes to this story, and they kind of start hitting one after another after a certain point in my book. If you take the time to read it, the actual book, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But right now, I just want to give kind of like a little sampler, little teaser trailer for, you know, Bloodstone. So this is Bloodstone, and I actually do want to kind of wait a moment for people to start coming into the lives before I really start reading off. What's crazy is it shows that people are joining, but it's not showing how many people are in there. It is what it is though. So, honestly, I'm gonna post this anyway. So I'm just gonna start reading, and we're gonna go basically get into this. Let's do it. All right. And then I guess when people join whatever part of the story they join in, they can either stick around and hear whatever they can hear at their point of coming here, or they can they cannot. Actually, before I get started, y'all know how I roll. So I got a bottle of sweet Riesling that I'm going to sip while I read. Um, this one is not. This one's not too strong because I don't want to get lit while reading and start jumbling and not reading properly. But actually, I'm gonna leave that right here. Wonderful. All right. So, and by the way, as I read this title out, this I am planning to make this book a series, like at least 4 books, maybe 5, depending on the pacing of the next couple of books. But the way this is going, might look like it's looking like it might turn into a 5 book series. But I was thinking about keeping it to 4. So we'll just go ahead and get into it. All right. So Bloodstone, Book 1, Chapter 1, written in gemstone. There is no shortage of stories lost in history, stories that generations of people refuse to share, stories that are forgotten by the few who witnessed, and stories that are forbidden to be told by those in power. Fortunately, the series of events that led to today's world are forever etched in history, a chain of interactions that began nearly 8 centuries ago. This land wasn't always ruled by established kingdoms and governed borders. There was a time when the mountains had no one to claim them, a time when the rivers became reservoirs to anyone and anything that happened upon their banks. The earth was traversed by tribes, nomadic gatherings of individuals who shared common goals and interests. Tribes would merge with others, defect from an existing one, be created by the whim of an individual, or even be decimated without a trace. Very few tribes that existed had the level of reputation, influence, and structure you would see in a more advanced society. One such tribe was the Chpt. The Chpt was considered a mobile fortress, a self-sustainable force that no other tribe could rival, largely due to the esteemed leadership of their patriarch Malme. The tribe was respected and feared for their combat, hunting, and agricultural skills. The forefront of their strength and security was Malme's son, later to be known as one of the five great spirits, Amon, a young and exceptionally strong hunter-warrior whose strength and perseverance were second to none. Described as a soldier who stood tall with muscles of stone, almond eyes, and long hair that flowed like a black river, he was always respected and revered. He was always a respected and revered man. However, that impression was nothing in comparison to the legend he became, the legend that changed the course of the world's history. This story began when Malme led the Chpt to a luscious region with an overabundance of resources. The Chpt had stumbled upon nature's treasure chest, and Malme made a decision that would completely transform the tribe's way of life. He decided the tribe would permanently settle within this rare oasis. There had been lands that were also saturated with life and opportunity. However, they paled in comparison during the height. Paled in comparison. During the height of the winter months of their first year within their new residence, an alarming number of members within the tribe fell ill. None of their known medical practices were working, and Malme was soon driven into a difficult scenario, needing to choose the proper course of action for the future of his people. In a desperate attempt to find a cure for this illness, as one of the handful of healthy adults left, Amon set out on a search to find a remedy with nothing but winter garments, a hunting knife, handfuls of dried meat, and a pelted sack. After half a day's travel, as the first night of Amon's journey grew dark and violently windy, he stumbled into a hidden cave where he took shelter for the night, picking up scattered branches at the entrance and making a pile. Without the wind constantly ripping away, he was able to build a fire. After Amon ate and rested a bit, he ventured deep into the cave, discovering a large, strange, blood-red gemstone. It was beautiful, smooth, and iridescent in the fire's light. Amon thought the women in the village could use it to make jewelry, to trade, or to keep for themselves. He thought it was best to stow this gemstone away and bring it back with him. Immediately after grabbing the apple-sized gemstone, something happened. It said that Amon felt a sudden surge of energy and adrenaline rush into his body, so much so that it felt as if his heart would burst out of his chest. The shock of this surge had rendered his muscles so tense he couldn't release his grip, and Amon collapsed onto the cold, flat ground of the cave. Amon eventually regained consciousness, and as he awoke, everything about his environment felt different to him. Despite the fire he had built going out, the cave seemed to have stayed warm enough. The air felt unnaturally fresh and calm, as if there was no air at all, yet still being able to breathe. As light filled the cave after reigniting the fire, Amon took a closer look at the walls and ceiling, realizing that his red gemstone enveloped the entire cave, as if the cave itself was made of it. And as he took a step forward, he became puzzled. His body felt light, too light, as if he weighed no more than a handful of feathers. He felt refreshed. No, he was more than refreshed. He felt as if his body never went through a day of hard labor or training. As much as he enjoyed this feeling, it was soon followed by a fear and worry. He sprinted toward the cave entrance, and it was still mostly dark outside, but the sun's light began to creep upon the horizon. Amon guessed he had slept on the floor the entire night. Being a little concerned about how long he was out for, he exited the cave quickly and without thinking took the mysterious red gemstone with him. The moment he grabbed the gemstone and headed out of the cave, he felt that same instant rush of energy as before. However, it was not as violent and as crippling as when he first held it. In fact, this new surge he experienced brought a sense of power he had never felt before. The night's darkness still enveloped the land, with cold winds bombarding everything they touched. Only this time, Amon felt no resistance from the wind. The next difference Amon noticed about himself came when he hurdled a boulder in his path. As soon as Amon's feet left the ground, the wind suddenly changed direction, carrying with it a tremendous updraft. Normally, Amon could clear just over 20 feet of distance in a running bound. On this night, as Amon's feet hit the ground, nearly injuring himself from the force of his awkward landing, he realized he had cleared nearly 70 feet in a single leap. When his feet hit the ground, he had to roll into the landing, sitting for a quick moment with a variety of emotions running through him: surprise, confusion, and angst. Before he was overcome with questions he knew he couldn't answer yet, he returned his attention to making his way back to the village. He cut through the terrain like a gazelle running through flat grasslands on a spring afternoon. What was originally a half-day escapade had become an hour-long dash for him, and even more surprisingly, he found himself free of fatigue with no shortness of breath once he arrived at the village. Upon arrival, the first to greet Amon was Malmay himself. As soon as Malmay laid eyes on him, he embraced Amon, nearly bringing himself to tears. On seeing his father's reaction, another wave of confusion plagued Amon. After a brief discussion with his father, it was then revealed that Amon had been gone for 5 nights. He staggered, struggling to grasp the weight of what was said, once again flooded with intense concern for the people of the Chpt. As he tried to process this information, he ran into the heart of the village, towards the tents designated as a shelter for the sick. As he entered the string of tents, he noticed that a good portion of the people that were being treated before his journey were no longer there. After a thorough scan through the beds, he then asked Kazel, one of the tribe's medicinal shamans, how many people had recovered. Amon was told that out of the 28 people that had fallen victim to this illness, 2 individuals had made a full recovery, and 8 have died. Receiving this tragic news, Amon retreated to his own tent to rest. For the remainder of the night, Amon couldn't sleep. In fact, even though he had just sprinted nonstop back to the village, running nearly 20 miles in the cold winter dawn, he felt as if he had all the energy in the world. Unable to sleep, his mind began replaying everything that happened since he entered the cave. Amon began to recount the phenomena that occurred from the moment he touched that strange gemstone, when he had a sudden spark of inspiration, giving him an idea. He hopped out of his bed, grabbed his pelted sack that had the gemstone, and re-entered the medical tent. He approached Kazel, the caretaker, and began to explain what had happened since he found the cave. Puzzled and obviously skeptical, Kazel requested he take a look at the gemstone. Amon grabbed it out of the sack and, after removing it, noticed there was a slight glow that came with the rush of energy he had been feeling. Kazel was watching in astonishment, and although Amon carried the gemstone barehanded, after accounting for the story Amon told him, the cautious caretaker decided to touch the gemstone with only his finger. Upon touching it, the caretaker's eyes shot wide open, then immediately dropped to his knees, vomited, and passed out. In this moment, the other caretaker resting in a vacant bed, Namir, was jolted awake by the sudden commotion. Amon stood in the middle of the tent, mildly confused. He remembered the sensations he felt when he originally held the gemstone, and although he couldn't have seen how he looked himself, the reaction Kazel endured seemed more violent than what Amon went through. Plagued with guilt, Amon believed that he may have killed the caretaker, and after checking Kazel's pulse, the now alert Namir confirmed that Kazel was still alive. In fact, he had deemed that there was nothing life-threatening about his condition. However, he made a verbal note that Kazel looked as if he was suffering from extreme dehydration. Thankfully, Kazel had regained consciousness only a few hours after his initial contact with the stone. Shortly after he received a few servings of bread and plenty of water, he began to explain what he felt before losing consciousness. He admitted that there was an explosion of energy within his body. However, just as quickly as it happened, he described a feeling that made little sense to the others. It was as if every bit of moisture in his skin had been pulled from his body at once, along with all of his physical strength. Amon then advised him to touch the gemstone again and restated that the first reaction, although different from his own, was most likely what needed to happen in order to reap the benefits the gemstone brings. Despite seeing Amon's perfect physical condition, even watching him hold the gemstone without issue, Kazel was still hesitant to touch it a second time. The caretaker slowly approached Amon and touched the gemstone with the tip of his finger. Amon became shocked as beads of water began forming all over the stone, almost like it was a human starting to sweat. The beads slowly grew bigger and in a short time combined into a shell of liquid water around the gemstone. In his excitement, Kazel adjusted his wrists and placed his entire hand on the gemstone adjacent to Amon's. Namir let out a slight yelp as the water shield swelled, then in the blink of an eye, expanded to entrap Amon and Kazel within a floating sphere of raging water. Amon, surprised and unable to breathe, yanked the stone from Kazel's hands, causing the water to lose all momentum and strength, dropping to the floor as if dumped from a giant bucket. Amon coughed and gasped for air, completely astonished but somehow excited. Amon had an even more intense hunger to learn exactly what this stone was and how it worked. As he looked at the caretakers to see if they shared the same excitement, Kazel turned pale, eyes rolling into the back of his head, and collapsed. Namir then let out a second and more concerned shriek. The commotion of the experiment stirred some of the patients in the tents out of their sleep. This recent development only added to Amon's curiosity. After some time of comforting and easing the patients back to sleep, as well as settling Kazel into a bed of his own, Namir and Amon talked about the results of the experiment with the gemstone. Namir hypothesized that the stone's ability was the conversion of natural energy, converting the energy of humans and maybe other living things into resources, while also being able to convert surrounding resources into what living things need, like adrenaline, explaining Amon's newfound physical endurance. What did not make sense was Amon's ability to hold the gemstone with no visibly negative effects. Convinced that the secrets that lie within the gemstone may help revolutionize the world itself, as well as possibly cure the disease plaguing the Chpt, Amon sought to put his efforts into figuring out exactly what the stone does. Still brimming with energy and refusing to rest, Amon convinced Namir to continue the experiment with the gemstone. Kazel was still resting in one of the beds, and there was no telling when he would wake up. For the sake of the tribe and discovering whether this stone could save them, Namir decided to try his luck at touching the gemstone. As expected, when Namir placed the tip of his finger to the gemstone, he was met with the same influx of energy, and just as fast, he fell to the ground and fainted. As Amon observed, Namir remained unconscious for a little longer than Kazel. By this time, the sun already reached directly overhead. Once Namir was back on his feet and tended to some of the waking patients in the tent, Amon pleaded for Namir to continue. After giving in to the request, the two decided to migrate outside to the snow-covered open fields. Once they were out in the open, Namir then followed the other caretaker's example and touched the stone with one finger, but warned that he would make no attempt to grab the entire stone. Touching the stone, nothing happened. After Amon raised an eyebrow at him, Namir expressed to Amon that he did feel a sensation traveling up his arm, but nothing visually developed. Suddenly, Amon let out a yelp and grimaced as he dropped the gemstone. As the stone hit the snow, the rock began to sizzle and melt the surrounding snow with pops and crackles. Amon then asked Namir if he had felt any heat coming from the stone. He replied that although the sensation of energy came with a warm feeling, he wasn't aware of any drastic changes in temperature itself. With an idea, Amon fetched a large, flat stone slab used for sharpening tools and using a thin animal pelt to cover his hand, placed the gemstone on the slab. Namir then connected his finger to the gemstone again. He kept it there as the constant rush of energy filled his body. After a minute, Amon placed a piece of parchment he kept in the sack onto the gemstone, where it instantly caught fire. Namir snatched his hand from the stone, studying the flame. He slowly brought his finger close to the flaming parchment just before the fire went out, and described to Amon that although he felt heat emanating from the fire, the intensity was as if the fire was several feet away. Astonished, Namir decided to take things a bit further and place 2 fingers on the stone. Once he made contact, the dying flame erupted and then engulfed his entire hand. Panic ensued as he screamed and thrashed vigorously. In order to extinguish the flames, he thrusted his hand into the snow. At least, he tried to. As his hand came within inches of the ground, the snow melted instantly, and he ended up punching a small patch of dead, wet grass. Namir's panic became absolute terror as the flame continued to breathe life. Even as this transpired, Amon was able to calmly observe what was happening. As Namir began to hyperventilate, Amon then struck him in the face with his open hand. Surprised and distracted, the caretaker stopped. Looking into Namir's eyes, Amon asked him if he felt any pain, to which he answered yes and placed his non-inflamed hand to his face. Then, the realization struck him like Amon's hand did. His face was the only thing that hurt. His hand felt no pain, nor heat more intense than sticking his hand in a bowl of lukewarm water, even though it was still blanketed with a swirling ball of fire. Now composed, Namir began to wave around his flaming hand, laughing and mumbling to himself. Shortly, this flame began to die down, and once it was out, the two of them saw neither a blemish nor burn on his hand from the fire. As his adrenaline began to die down, Namir's stomach churned with a wave of nausea and fatigue. causing his legs to buckle as he fainted. As Amon lifted Namir off the snow-laden ground, he finally became aware of his surroundings. At the edge of the open field, near the lining of medical tents, a group of 20 or so tribe members, including Malmay himself, were standing and watching in a mix of astonishment and fear. Amon requested a private conversation with Malmay and began telling him everything involving the gemstone, from what happened to him in the cave to the recent events Malmay just witnessed. Malmay chose to postpone these experiments for the time being, to take time to make a decision on what to do with the stone. While Kazel had yet to regain consciousness from his incident, Namir had woken up after resting for a day and a half. He eventually expressed his support to Malmay for continuing the experiments. Malmay ordered Amon to only use the gemstone under his supervision, and if using it brings no further side effects outside of the user's fatigue, to begin assessing the possibility of using this stone to either heal the sick members or benefit those who remained healthy. Discussing the details of the experiment and results, Amon, Malmay, and Namir began to form one theory after another. The largest mystery was Amon himself. Neither of them had any idea as to why Amon could hold the gemstone without consequence. Why does nothing happen when he holds it? Why doesn't he experience the draining effects the others faced? Namir began to hypothesize that due to Amon's first interaction with the stone, keeping him unconscious for almost a week, compared to the mere hours for the others, there had to be a correlation between those pieces of information. 4 days after Kazel had collapsed from his test with the stone, he finally woke up. Although conscious, Kazel's body was frail and weak. He could barely stand, and he was extremely malnourished, as if he hadn't eaten in multiple weeks. After the events of what happened were brought to the entire village's attention, Amon, Malmay, both caretakers, and 4 brave tribe members who volunteered formed their own research team to continue conducting these experiments. The following 5 days of experimentation led to these observations. The first time someone touches the gemstone, the same reaction happens in every person. A surge of energy, followed by an extreme wave of exhaustion, ending in a loss of consciousness. The amount of time each member was unconscious varied. Not one person was ever unconscious for less than an hour. However, no one other than Amon was ever unconscious for more than half a day. The group proceeded to call this unconscious state an awakening period. Like Namir had originally theorized, there was a correlation between the time they were unconscious and the strength of phenomena they could safely create while in contact with the gemstone. The longer the awakening period a person underwent, the more intense their seemingly supernatural feats were, as well as the higher their tolerance to the stone's exhausting effects. Among the research group, only 2 people besides Amon were able to touch more than the tip of their finger without losing consciousness: one of the volunteers and Malmay. Even then, their contact with the gemstone had to be kept a few moments at best. After a few weeks, there was a dramatic increase in members who wanted to aid in the experiments. Soon, the entire tribe, apart from the young children, had initiated their awakening period, and the abilities of the gemstone soon became clear. Unfortunately, the blood-red gemstone did not help in the recovery of those who were sick. Of the 18 remaining patients at the time of Amon's return from the cave, 13 had died, 11 of which were elderly, and 5 made a full recovery. Despite the emotional toll of those deaths, Amon and his people continued to study the gemstone with hopes that similar situations may be prevented in the future. Instead of a medicinal remedy, Amon's journey had led to the discovery of something that transcended anything they could have imagined. This gemstone forever changed the course of human history. During the experiments conducted by the Chpt, it was discovered that this gemstone, this bloodstone, wasn't converting energy into resources and vice versa, but it was in fact using a human's living energy to conjure and manipulate the natural elements. So that's the end of chapter 1. Lovely. All right. By the way, anyone on live, comment of what you thought of the first chapter for as long as you, as much as the chapters you witnessed. All right. Chapter 2, Bonds. The history lesson echoed through the living space, sitting heavy with all the ears in attendance. Standing in the center of the living space was the storyteller herself, Nani Samir, a tall and elegant woman who had just reached her 40s, yet her cream-colored skin glowed with youth. Her long, wavy brown hair was tied in a bun atop her head, exposing her green eyes and high cheekbones. "Ooh, next can you tell us about the Amicus War?" Asking this question, his cloudy gray eyes wide in anticipation, sat Akil Oman. Throughout his life, Akil had very little patience to sit still, especially for lectures or small talk. However, when listening to any history of stories involving the five great spirits and the Amicus War, he could never get enough. "Maybe another time. It's getting late and someone needs to be heading back before it gets too dark." As Nani replied, she turned her gaze towards Evie Hagazi, the young girl sitting next to Akil. "Ah, don't worry about that. Zaid and I will walk Evie back afterwards." As he suggested this, Akil turned towards the boy sitting on the other side of Evie, Nani's son and Akil's best friend, Zaid Samir. Akil aimed a wide-eyed glance to convince Zaid to go along with his suggestion. "Don't volunteer me for that. She should go home, and I don't care about hearing about the war as much as you do." Zaid scrunched his face and stuck out his tongue to tease Akil. "Ugh, fine. Come on, Evie. I'll walk you home." As Akil got to his feet and extended a hand to help Evie onto hers, Zaid let out a mocking cackle. Upon hearing her son's laughter, Nani extended her hand with her palm facing up. Her sleeveless white and green frilled gown began to sway and ripple. She quickly formed a pointing motion to the ceiling, and in sync with the gesture, the stone tile and column of rock connected to it extended 2 feet from the ground where Zaid sat, catapulting him to a standing position. Zaid grunted as he rubbed his tailbone and glared at the retreating tile, then at his mother. "Since you have a good bit of energy, you walk with them," Nani demanded as she glared back at her son. "And don't take too long on the way back. Your father wants to have a chat with both of you when he gets home." Akil and Zaid looked at each other in excitement. They knew exactly what the discussion was about, and their excitement was hard to contain. Akil, Zaid, and Evie then headed out the door and towards the Hagazi household. The sun was still well above the horizon. Its rays felt warm and welcoming on Akil's honey-brown skin. As they began their walk down the paved road, he couldn't help but feel emotional, knowing that this may be the last spring for years where the trio could still stroll together like this. Although he was not shy in nature, Akil never felt the need to make many friends, and even throughout his early years in school, he felt most comfortable being around his adoptive family, the Samirs. To Akil, Zaid was more than a best friend, he was a brother, and the Samirs had treated Akil as if he was their own. Even when confronted with the hypothetical questions that involved knowing or meeting his biological parents, Akil never gave any thought to them. No matter where his blood came from, this was his family. Evie's family, the Hagazis, have had a strong relationship with the Samirs for generations. Akil and Zaid were present for Evie's entire childhood, and despite her being an only child, Akil always believed she viewed him and Zaid as her older brothers. Given that the only female in the Samir family household was Nani, Akil thought it was nice to have a younger sister. Although Zaid was a month older than him, Akil still felt like an older brother to these two. Akil had accepted that he was the unspoken leader of this trio. He was mature beyond his years, level-headed, and kept the two accountable for their actions. Zaid was best described as a wild card. While intelligent, he was mischievous, cunning, and enjoyed taking a spontaneous approach to nearly everything he did. Evie was much like Zaid in her own way. She was smart and meticulous, using her quick wits and talents in ways that constantly ended in lectures and hard-learned lessons. "What are you thinking so hard about?" Akil nearly stumbled as Evie appeared inches from his face, interrogating him while hovering almost a foot off the ground, so they were eye level. Her unblinking hazel eyes were peering into Akil's. A few strands of her straight brown hair were sticking to her sweaty forehead. Zaid, a few steps away, waited for the answer as well, looking just as curious. "Well, I was thinking that this is nice." As Akil responded, Evie turned her head and locked eyes with Zaid, and after a moment looked back at Akil, and the pair started laughing. Akil looked at the two of them confused. "What did I say?" Zaid was the first to reply. "Dude, you sound like you're already in your 40s. Our parents talk like that." As Evie chimed in with a mocking voice, she descended back to the ground. "You sound like a grandpa going, I remember when I walked with my babies before my knees fell off. She then wrinkled her face and imitated an old man limping with a cane. Akil genuinely thought the impression was funny. However, to save face, he simply looked in the opposite direction. I'm sorry, I can't help that I'm enjoying what might be one of the last walks together for a while. As Akil said this, his voice trailed. The mood tightened. Zaid's animated smile faded into a smirk, and Evie stopped smiling entirely. Sensing that he may have ruined the mood, Akil stepped forward and embraced Evie into a hug. Although she did not return the gesture, she did not shy away from him. I'm sorry, Evie, Akil whispered. I didn't mean to spoil the fun, but I really will miss this. It's okay. It's not like I won't see you guys at all, but I'm gonna miss this too. Evie's voice began to falter and started tearing up as she eventually hugged Akil back. As they were embracing, Zaid crept his way behind Evie and, without warning, jammed 2 fingers on each hand into both sides of her midsection. Her body jumped so suddenly her head connected with Akil's chin. Ow! Zaid, you asshole, why'd you do that? Rubbing his chin, Akil scolded her. Evie, how many times do I have to say it? You may be a teenager now, but you have to watch your mouth. At this statement, Zaid and Evie looked at each other again, and after a moment, they burst into another fit of laughter. Oh my gosh, could you sound any more like you belong in a retirement home? Zaid dropped to the ground laughing, clutching his stomach. With his cheeks blushing in embarrassment, Akil allowed this joke to get the best of him. He quickly crouched and, with one hand on the ground for balance, made a sweeping kick motion towards Zaid, his foot hovering an inch above the ground. With a swirling upheaval of dust, a powerful and concentrated gust of wind generated from Akil's kick and caught Zaid's side, lifting him off the ground and sending him into a bush on the side of the path they were walking. Unfazed, as if he hadn't moved an inch, Zaid continued laughing with leaves now caught in his brow-length, wavy black hair. Akil started walking again as he spoke. Let's hurry up. It'll be dark soon. We don't have all day. Evie extended a hand to help Zaid out of the bush, and the trio continued their walk, arriving at Evie's home in no time. Despite growing up in a much larger-than-average home with the Samirs, the grandiose structure of the Higazi estate always impressed Akil. The country of Jame is ruled by a king, King Yayamal, and there is a long-established hierarchy among many families that live in the capital. There are several families whose generations have aided the royal family directly with special skill sets that set them apart from general government officials. 4 of those families were given the title of Exana. If the king is the pinnacle of the pyramid, the Exana are the corners below, directly supporting the royal family, and the Samir family was one such corner. The Higazi family, a family of international merchants and arms dealers, were bestowed that title as well and became one of the wealthiest families in the country by building their own trade and manufacturing services that are now reputable worldwide. The house was surrounded by an immaculate bronze fence decorated with fleur-de-lis along the top. The house was made almost entirely out of dark gray cobblestone with triangular roofing and matte metallic shingles. From the gated fence, there was a 40-foot-long white-tiled walkway in the center, with a blooming garden on either side. The walkway led up to a high-arching front overpass where the large arching oak doors led inside. The entire property was nearly symmetrical. There was a row of 6 15-foot-tall ivory pillars lining both sides of the doorway. On the edge of the pillars to the left, the roof peaked again into a section of the house reserved for guests, a personal section with all accommodations of a normal house on its own. On the right, at the end of the pillars, the roof tapered off into a downward slope for 2 feet, then flattened out into a simple box structure. This is where the family kept their vehicles. Given how expensive vehicles are, the fact that Evie's family owned 3 of them was a symbol of wealth by itself. Evie led the trio to the front of the gate, and as she pushed the gate open, Evie's personal instructor, Yarrow, appeared through the front door. Yarrow has been Evie's instructor since she was little. Contrary to how most wealthy families, especially the Exana, raise their children, the Samir family have a history of enrolling their children in public preliminary schools. Akil and Zaid grew up attending public schools like most kids in the city. Evie, on the other hand, experienced her childhood like most other members of wealthy families, having 1 or more instructors like Yarrow to homeschool the children. This helped strengthen Evie's attachment to the boys, as they were the closest thing to peers she has despite the 3-year age gap. Akil had unwavering respect for Yarrow. While being in his 50s, Yarrow was an exceptionally powerful man. Prior to being hired by the Higazi family as an instructor, he was enlisted in Jame's army for nearly 20 years, and with accolades to show for it. With shoulder-length silver hair, a sunken face, and thin, wiry frame, no one would ever imagine that he still had the strength of a general, the third highest position in Jame's army. Evie's family hit the jackpot with Yarrow, because not only did they gain a trusted and intelligent instructor, but they also gained a security guard. Welcome home, Evie. Your mother finished dinner not too long ago, and you should dig in before it gets cold. Hello, boys. Thank you for walking her home as always. As he finished, Yarrow bowed to Akil and Zaid. The two bowed in response, then Akil turned to Evie. Have a good night, Evie. We'll see you soon. And with a hand raised, Evie responded, Thank you, guys. Tonight was fun. See ya. As Yarrow waved goodbye, him and Evie entered the house and closed the door. Zaid immediately turned to walk back while Akil stood for a minute at the entrance of the gate. Hey, come on, we gotta get back before Dad gets too antsy. He's probably home by now. Zaid was right. Akil took one deep breath to soak in the moment. As he ran his hand through his thick, curly black hair, he thought to himself, he really is going to miss these walks. Akil took it upon himself to close the bronze gate, and after turning to join Zaid, the two boys looked at each other and smirked. The day they had been waiting for, the conversation they were soon to have, would decide the course of their entire future. The anticipation was nearly torturing, and feeling the excitement, their walks broke into a run as they began heading home. So that is the end of chapter 2. Just a little side note, if you couldn't tell, the first chapter, even though it was a prologue, whenever you read the book, there's quotations before the first word and quotations after the last word of chapter 1. Nani, the mother of the Samir family, she was telling this story to the group, and that's why it shifted to modern day, my main characters in the living room in chapter 2. I say that because it's less obvious when I read it, but if you read it, you'll see. All right. Now for the third chapter. Chapter 3, The Decision. Walking through the front door, Akil and Zaid were surprised to be greeted by Zaid's older brothers, the identical twins Ube and Umay Samir. They got their height and muscular builds from their father. Every other feature came from their mother, the cream skin, brown hair, and green eyes. The pair seemed almost godlike. Even though Akil saw them as his own brothers, he always felt that they had an overwhelming presence. After all, at 18 years old, both twins became the youngest in Jame's history to become Daru, a title given to the 10 most powerful soldiers of the army. Umay is ranked number 7, and Ube is ranked number 8. The first to speak was Ube. Dad told us about tonight, so we wanted to come by and see what the little brothers decide to do. Ever since the twins joined the Daru 4 years ago, they accepted the offer by the king to move into their own homes close to the royal palace. Zaid, I can see a successful life of farming in your future. Ube lifted his hand, palm upward, and a small ball of fire sparked into existence. As Ube flexed his fingers, the swirling ball turned into a barn made of fire, with smaller animal-shaped flames forming around it. Akil glanced at Zaid, who, rolling his eyes and ignoring the fire animations, looked mildly annoyed. After a few seconds, a thin, roping stream of water shot through the living space, putting out the miniature fire figures with a hiss of steam. Ube turned and looked at Umay, who sat on the room's large leather couch, with his open hand half resting on his propped knee. Ube blew a raspberry and sat down in the love seat across the room. What was left of the rope of water returned and formed a circle above Umay's head like a halo. The halo of water gradually became thinner until it evaporated completely. Tonight's supposed to be special, so I told him not to be annoying, but little brothers never listen, do they? Ube scoffed at Umay's comment before replying. You always have to bring it up, don't you? Being 10 minutes older doesn't mean a damn thing, and before you bring that up, you're only ranked higher than me because you're a nerd. Sucks to be younger and dumber, doesn't it? Ubay snapped his attention towards Akil, who started to snicker after the smart remark. Umay leaned forward and laughed, adding more salt to the wound. Zaid then saw his chance to make his jab. Not much to say when you've always had the lowest grades in the house, huh? With this comment, Ubay huffed and threw his hands in the air in defeat. Once the joking and laughter died down, the audible effort of someone clearing the throat came from the dining room. The corner of the house formed into a large dining area, with the kitchen and living space connected on adjacent sides down the middle. In the center of the dining room sat a long and smooth white marble table with winding oak legs. Sitting at that table was the number 2 ranked Daru, the second strongest man enlisted in Jame's army, their father, Zan Samir. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Zan Samir never instilled fear into his children. However, he was an advocate for complete respect. Ubay and Umay rose from their seats and entered the dining room, followed by Akil and Zaid. Their father sat at the head of the table, with two folders in front of him. Zan was a large man, and although the twins have surpassed him in height, his wider and muscular build filled the dining space, with his massive hands clasped and resting on the table. His short black hair and goatee were peppered with grays. A vertical scar ran behind his right eye, and his kind, blue eyes were the only feature of his that Akil did not find intimidating. He thought maybe it was because of the comfort he had with Zaid, who also had the same blue eyes. Ubay and Umay sat on either side of their father. Zan gestured for Akil and Zaid to sit at the corner of the table opposite of him. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to start by saying how proud I am of both of you. As Samirs, we pride ourselves in our strength. However, to survive, you cannot only be strong. As a man, you must be smart, resilient, and humble. Watching you two grow into the men you are now has been a beautiful process. Taking a pause, Zan looked around at everyone at the table. Watching all of my sons has been something I cherish and wouldn't trade for the world. Zan then turned his attention to Akil. Akil, you have been an exceptional young man. The level of maturity you have displayed is something you should take great pride in, because I take pride in it. Though it was risky, we told you at a very young age that you were adopted, and although you understood, you didn't allow it to change how you acted towards us. To call you my son has been an honor, and you always will be my son, no less than Zaid and the twins. Akil blushed and turned his gaze downward. Well, I was abandoned. Many people have kids by accident and either don't want them or resent them. You chose to take me in, and only 2 months after Mom had Zaid. You guys took care of me and always made me feel like I mattered. I had a place where I belonged. Whether you told me I was adopted or not, it didn't change the fact that you were my family. Akil began to tear up as he finished his sentiment. He noticed that along with his soft smile, there was a hint of something else in Zan's expression. Was it guilt of exposing the truth so early? Or was it sympathy he had for Akil never having known his real family? Akil thought it best not to ask any questions. Umay then broke the short silence. Honestly, thanks to us, Mom was used to caring for 2 babies at once. She always jokes that she had 2 sets of twins. Ubay then chimed in. Jokes? No, she did have 2 sets of twins. They're just fraternal. Everyone let out a light-hearted chuckle. Then Zan brought attention back to the topic at hand. Anyway, Akil and Zaid, we've talked many times about this, and although I could probably guess what your decisions are, it is my job as your guardian to review all options with you before we finalize the paperwork. Zan opened one of the folders and removed a stack of papers. With both of you turning 16 and having the grades you've obtained through preliminary school, we get to move to the next step of your life and the beginning of your careers. Zan then lifted the papers and began reading the introductory page out loud. Congratulations on your eligibility for admissions to Amethyst this summer. Amethyst is the second and final education program people enroll in to establish their future careers. There are 10 departments you can apply to: the Amicus, Agricultural, Business, Communications, Education, Engineering, Human Resource, Medical, Military, and Scientific Research branch. Each requires a written submission form followed by an aptitude test. A submission form may be entered once the applicant reaches the age of 16, and aptitude tests are held in the months of January and July of each year. Though you may submit to multiple departments and take multiple tests, you may only enroll in one at a time. A minimum of 2 years of education is required in each department to graduate. At graduation, you will receive a certification that grants you access to enter the workforce respective to that field. Any questions so far? Akil had a few questions of his own, but Zaid was the first to speak up. So, if you want to get more than one certificate, do I have to spend the entire 2 years in one department, graduate, then spend the next 2 years in another? Also, if I take multiple tests this July and pass them, will I have to retake the test after I finish my first certificate? Zahn seemed pleased by these inquiries. Both good questions. Amethyst does their aptitude and certification testing in January and July. During testing, classes are suspended, so schooling is separated into half-year semesters, one from February to June and one from August to December. 2 semesters form a year, so if you want, you could alternate departments each semester. Once you've completed 4 semesters, you may take a test for your certification. Now, if you pass an aptitude test, that passing result is valid for 4 years, meaning that within those 4 years, you may enroll for any eligible department without having to test again. Does that make sense? Both Akil and Zaid nodded, and this in-depth explanation had answered the questions Akil wanted to ask. Akil had learned some new information and began to rethink his situation. The Samirs are Exana, one of the 4 pillars under the king. Wealth, knowledge, military might, and political influence are the cornerstones for a royal family to thrive, and each Exana was a family that directly supports them in one of these 4 aspects. The Samir family was known as the family of power. For generations, the Samirs were exceptionally strong fighters. Their life force, their physical strength, and their ability to control elements were exceptional. Even Nani, who married into the Samirs, proved to be quite strong if she was serious. Every man in the house that graduated Amethyst became a Daru. And although Akil did have a passion for fighting and the army, a part of him was excited that he could do other things as well. After getting lost in thought, Akil snapped to as Zahn continued. Boys, these folders contain your applications and some additional info on careers, as well as which departments those careers would be best for. It's still the first week of June, but these forms will need to be submitted before the end of the month. You don't have to decide by tonight, so feel free to take some time to think it over. What's there to think over? Ube cut in, leaning over onto his crossed arms. Akil became an influencer earlier than anyone I've ever seen, and he's damn near a controller without professional training. With how talented he is, he'll most likely have an affinity for more elements, too. It's only right he goes into the military with us. After the slight praise, he then frowned and pointed to Zaid. Oh, and by the way, farmers would apply to the agricultural department. Zaid looked up at Ube, then without a word went back to reading the papers in his folder. Even though Akil felt Ube was exaggerating a bit, there was some truth to what he said. Akil wasn't as tall and muscular as the Samirs, but he was athletic and strong for his size. His muscles were toned, and thanks to his elemental affinity for air, his conditioning was superb. Ube was also reminded him of his own talent. There are 4 stages to a person's elemental control, the first stage being an influencer. Though not everyone will make it to all 4 stages, every person reaches the influencer stage. This stage manifests within most people during puberty, between the ages of 10 and 13. Influencers have no control over their element, but there are subtle things that happen surrounding a person when they reach this stage. For Akil, he was 5 when it happened. He was playing tag with Zaid and the twins at the same time, and as he was trying to catch Ube, a strong gust of wind caused him to shoot past Ube at a high speed, injuring himself after hitting a nearby tree and breaking his collarbone. Becoming an influencer at that age was unprecedented. The second stage, manipulation, allows you to willfully affect an element and its properties. The third stage, conjuring, gives someone the power to create an element using their own life energy. The final stage, controlling, is the ability to control natural and conjured elements. Most people never complete the third stage, yet Akil entered the fourth stage before turning 15. Zaid had just recently entered the third stage himself, and he had as much natural talent as the twins. Akil's thought process was interrupted when Zaid slammed his folder onto the table. I, at least, wanted to look at my other options, but I only have interest in one thing after all. I'm joining the military department. Zahn smiled. I expected as much. However, I do advise you to take the tests for other departments. There is no harm in having more than one department in your back pocket, especially if you may have a semester where you want to try something new, something different. Zaid nodded and leaned back into his chair. No, Dad, you do have a point, but I know that I won't be happy in any other department. Nothing else catches my eye, and at this point, being a fighter is in my blood. Zahn nodded with a slight smirk, as if it was what he expected his son to say. Then he turned towards Akil. Once again, there is no need to answer this tonight, but do you have any idea of what you want to do, Akil? Akil sat looking down at the papers in front of him. He spent a lot of the silence lost in thought, but there are things he had thought about long before tonight. Akil was inquisitive, curious, and always yearning to learn more. The next sentence Akil uttered shocked everyone at the table and nearly felt like a joke. He looked up at Zansamir, full of confidence. I'm applying to all of them. And that is the end of chapter 3. So, this was just an opening. Like I said, this is a teaser, an introduction, not only to my book, but to the world that I'm creating. It is quite a bit of exposition, obviously, which would happen in the first 3 chapters. I would say the pacing of my book immediately picks up after this. And that's why I stopped at chapter 3, because to me, if the first 3 chapters can catch your attention and pull you into the story, I think that you will have absolutely no problem reading the rest of this book and basically getting hooked. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for listening to the first 3 chapters of my book. In the comments, please let me know any type of opinions, critiques. Witnessing it as I'm reading it, I do still see that there's a couple of tweaks here and there. Not necessarily typos, but with just wording and kind of the flow of some of my sentences that I need to work on. But I mean, that's constantly, like, every time I open the book to write, more pages, I tend to go back and, edit and stuff like that. And I also spent 2 hours kind of going through editing the first 3 chapters before I filmed this, and still, missed a couple of things, but, not too much on any, like, grammar or whatever. But I would rather, if it's regarding my writing, I would rather hear opinions or maybe critiques on the flow of things. How, if I'm, like, repeating certain phrases or words too much, if the pacing is good, things like that, of that nature. I did struggle a lot with trying to, do well with descriptive scenes and painting scenarios and just the visuals of my book and the scenes that they draw out. And I want to know if people are really seeing what I'm trying to put on the page, at least close to what is in my head, or if you guys require some more details, or if there's a lot to be desired on the descriptive aspect. But once again, thank you guys. I really appreciate this. This really kind of even further reignited my hunger to really finish this out and to keep going. Right now, my word count is at 63,000 words. So I'm about almost 2/3 of the way through my book. And once I finish it, there will be a select few, basically either people I trust or the first few people who inquire about reading my book, that I will give rough drafts, rough copies out to, and get their perspective before I officially publish the book. But once again, thank you guys for tuning in. I hope to hear your feedback. And honestly, until next time, love you guys. Peace out.